325 particles of plastic per liter. In water, marketed as pure. That's what came back from the lab. And that was the average across 10 brands. One brand came back at 831. We tested the 10 best-selling bottled water brands in America. Bought them off standard retail shelves, sent them to an independent lab, and not a single bottle, came back clean. Here's what's going to bother you by the end of this. It's not the number that's the problem. It's what those particles are doing that the industry has known about and not told you. And there's a finding from a 2024 study, I'll get to it, rewrote how I personally think about this. Stay with me, because this gets significantly worse before it gets actionable. Americans spend $19 billion on bottled water every year. It is the best-selling packaged beverage in the country. And the entire value proposition, the reason you pay $2 for something that comes free out of a tap, is purity. That's the deal. You're not paying for water. You're paying for the absence of things. So we wanted to know, what's actually in there? We selected brands using Nielsen sales data, the 10 highest unit volume sellers in the US market. We used a method called Nile red staining with fluorescence microscopy. Here's the short version. A fluorescent dye binds specifically to plastic polymers. Under the right light, plastic particles glow. Everything else stays dark. You count what glows. The lab received sealed, unopened bottles from standard retail. Results recorded before brand identities were shared. Particle counts in particles per liter, size ranges, and polymer type were identifiable. 12 days later, the results came in. I read them 3 times. Every brand is positive, 0 exceptions. Average across all 10, 325 plastic particles per liter. That aligns almost exactly with a 2018 Orb Media investigation, the first major study of this kind, which tested 259 bottles across 11 brands in 9 countries and found the same average. That was 6 years ago. Nothing has changed. The range in our results is what tells the real story. Lowest count, 94 particles per liter. Highest, 831. That spread is not random. It points to manufacturing conditions, storage handling, and bottle material as variables that matter. You are not buying an equivalent product across brands, even when the label says purified water. Now, polymer breakdown. What kind of plastic? The most common, polypropylene. That's the cap. The act of unscrewing the lid sheds fragments directly into the water at the bottleneck. Every time you open a bottle, you are adding plastic to it. Second most common, polyethylene terephthalate, PET, the bottle material itself. The container is shedding into the product it's holding. You are not drinking water that was contaminated somewhere upstream. You are drinking water that was contaminated by its own packaging during normal use in your hand. Let's talk about what the label doesn't tell you. The FDA regulates bottled water as a food product. It sets standards for microbial safety, heavy metals, and specific chemical contaminants. But here's the gap. There is currently no federal limit on microplastic particle counts in bottled water. None. The regulatory framework was written before microplastics were part of the scientific vocabulary. So when you see meets all FDA standards on a label, and every brand in our test does, that statement is completely true and completely silent on plastics. This is not illegal. It is a regulatory lag. But it means the compliance language consumers have been trained to trust as a safety signal says nothing about the thing we actually found. The Environmental Working Group has been pushing for updated standards since 2018. As of now, that push has not resulted in a federal particle limit. What that means practically, no brand is required to test for microplastics. No brand is required to disclose microplastic counts. And most don't. You've been reading purified and natural spring and inferring a level of safety assurance that the regulatory framework does not actually provide for this category of contamination. That's the play, not a conspiracy. Just a gap, and a product category that has no incentive to close it. Here's where I'm going to be precise, because the science is genuinely in motion, and overclaiming here would be cheap. The World Health Organization reviewed microplastics in drinking water in 2019. Their conclusion: at current measured exposure levels, microplastics do not appear to present a health risk. But, and this is the part most coverage drops, they also stated the evidence base was insufficient for a full risk assessment and flagged the research as urgent and ongoing. That's not a clearance. That's, we don't have enough data to be certain either way. In regulatory language, that sounds reassuring. In plain language, it means this is unresolved. What is documented? A 2020 study in environmental science and technology calculated that the average American ingests between 39,000 and 52,000 microplastic particles annually through food and water. People who drink primarily bottled water ingest approximately twice the microplastic load of people drinking primarily filtered tap water. Twice. There's also the carrier problem. PET bottles leach phthalates and bisphenol A, both classified as endocrine-disrupting compounds by the European Chemicals Agency. Endocrine disruptors interfere with hormonal signaling. A 2021 meta-analysis in The Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology found associations between phthalate exposure and disrupted thyroid function, insulin resistance, and reproductive development complications. And one more documented variable most people don't know: heat accelerates all of this. A 2014 study in food chemistry found that elevated storage temperatures, a car in summer, an uncooled warehouse, measurably increase both phthalate leaching and plastic particle release from PET bottles. That case of 24, sitting in a hot delivery truck for 3 days before it hit the shelf. Not the same product as the one that went from manufacturer to refrigeration immediately. If you've ever tasted plastic in a warm bottled water, you weren't imagining it. That taste is migration. Drop that in the comments. I want to know how common that experience actually is. I told you at the start there was something I was holding. Here it is. Our test could detect particles down to approximately 1 micrometer. Anything smaller, what researchers now classify as nanoplastics, requires different equipment operating at the nanoscale. We acknowledge that limit up front. What we didn't fully anticipate was how much that limit matters. In January 2024, a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences used a new technique called stimulated Raman scattering microscopy to quantify nanoplastic particles in bottled water for the first time. They tested 3 major U.S. brands. Average count, 240,000 particles per liter. Per brand, about 90% of those were nanoplastics, completely invisible to the method we used. Completely invisible to every prior study in this space. We've been measuring microplastics and calling it a complete picture. It wasn't even close. But here's why size is not just a measurement problem. It's a biological one. Research published in Nature Nanotechnology found that plastic particles below 200 nanometers can cross the blood-brain barrier, can cross the placental barrier, can enter individual cells. Microplastics, because of their size, largely cannot do these things. Nanoplastics, because of their size, can. Whether this translates to measurable clinical harm at current human exposure levels, the research is not there yet. I'm not going to tell you it causes disease because the studies establishing that causal chain haven't been completed. But particles from plastic water bottles are physically capable of entering the human brain is a sentence that is supported by peer-reviewed science right now. And the bottle generating 240,000 of them per liter is a product you can buy at any gas station in America for $2.49. That's the thing I've been sitting with for 3 weeks. 3 tiers. Pick the one that fits your life. Highest impact, filtered tap water. A quality undersink filter certified to NSF/A, NSI, standard 53 or 58. Those are the specific certifications that cover microplastic and chemical contaminant removal. Upfront cost runs $150 to $400, depending on the unit. If you're currently spending $30 a month on bottled water, That filter pays for itself in under a year and delivers lower measured microplastic exposure than every brand we tested. This is the move that changes your baseline permanently. Middle ground: glass or stainless steel bottles filled from a filtered source. No PET contact surface. No polypropylene cap shedding at scale. The majority of what we found in our results was contact surface contamination. Reduce the contact surface. You reduce the exposure. You don't have to overhaul your life. You have to change the container. Minimum harm reduction if you're staying with bottled water. Never leave bottles in heat. Don't refill single-use PET bottles. The structural integrity degrades with each cycle and particle shedding increases. If you're buying for children or during pregnancy, the research on endocrine-disrupting compound exposure at developmental stages makes the filtered tap option worth treating as a priority rather than an upgrade. One honest note on cost: the filtered tap option requires upfront spend that not everyone has access to right now. That's real. If that's your situation, the single most impactful free change is storage. Keep bottles cold, avoid heat exposure, and stop refilling single-use containers. It won't eliminate exposure, but it reduces the variables you can control. Frequency matters more than perfection. One consistent change, sustained, is worth more than an overhaul that doesn't stick. Here's what we actually found: 10 brands, 0 clean results, an industry compliance framework that doesn't test for the thing you're most exposed to, and a 2024 study that suggests every prior measurement, including ours, was capturing maybe 10% of what's actually in the bottle. The purity promise is the entire product, and it is not being verified against the contamination category that matters most right now. You now know something that most people buying bottled water today don't know. What you do with that is yours. If you make one change, make it the storage. Keep bottles out of heat. That costs nothing, and it matters immediately. The filter investigation: what NSF certifications actually test for, which units performed and which failed our secondary round, is already up. That one has a finding that surprised the lab technician running it. If any of this is relevant to a specific health decision, this is a starting point, not a prescription. Your doctor has context, we don't. Remember, the front of the package is marketing. The truth is always behind the label.